the attacks possible. So please give a warm welcome to our speaker tonight, Dr. Andrew Bernstein.
Thank you. I want to start off by thanking Simon and the Libertarian Organization, and of course George and Razi and the Objectivist Group for bringing me to London, and setting up the schedule I should say, for me to speak all over London. I mean, I'm here for 7 days and we're doing 7 talks, right? So that's why they pay me the big bucks. Furthermore, before I get started, I just wanted to, give my daughter some credit here. I hate ties. I never wear them, but I think they're a torture device. But my ex-wife and I adopted a little girl from China named Penelope Joy Penny, who just turned 14 2 weeks ago, and she and her mom went to Antarctica over Christmas, and Penny got me this penguin tie. So now it's a special tie, and I need to wear it. I was thinking to get a T-shirt that said "Somebody went to Antarctica," and all I got was this lousy tie. But I don't want it. No, I got my special tie. Okay, now religion versus morality. This is a talk that I've given many times for the Ayn Rand Institute at universities, across the United States and other places in the world. It's been published as an essay in the Objective Standard, where I'm a contributing editor. And since I had a computer meltdown, I lost the digital copy, but I have it as an essay here. So this is what I'll use for the talk. Now, on the morning of September 11th, 2001. Mohammed Atta and his minions flew their stolen planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, destroying the former and murdering thousands of innocent civilians. Now, what motivated such an atrocity? What filled the murderers with such all-consuming hatred that they were willing to surrender their lives in order to kill thousands of innocent human beings? The clear answer is that these were religious zealots engaged in holy war with their primordial enemy, the embodiment of the modern capitalist and secular West, the United States of America. In their evil way, the Islamists provide mankind with some clarity. They remind us of what real religion is and looks like, not the Christianity or Judaism of the modern West, watered down and diluted by the secular principles of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, rejecting, sin-bashing, kill the infidels, give me that old-time religion. Right? This is the real deal. The atrocities of 9/11 and other similar jihadist acts by Islamists do not clash with their creed. On the contrary, they are consistent with the essence of religion, not merely of Islam, but religion more broadly, of religion as such. This is an all-important truth that after thousands of years, humanity must finally learn. Religion is hazardous to your health. And religion is hazardous to your health, and the more religious somebody is, the more dangerous they are. The innocent human beings, I mean. Now, unfortunately, conventional views of religion in our day remain largely the opposite. Many people believe that religion is not only a legitimate moral code, but more and deeper. There's so many people who believe that religion is the basis of morality. That without religion there can be no morality. No moral rule. As one character in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov put it very nicely, in the absence of God, no moral laws against anything. In the absence of God, anything is morally possible. In the 21st century, there are still people who believe this. But the converse is true. A rational, fact-based, life-promoting moral code is impossible on religious premises. Indeed, religion clashes with every premise, every principle and factual requirement of a proper life advancing ethics. A proper ethics, one capable of promoting flourishing human life on earth, requires the utter rejection of religion, of all of its premises, tenets, implications, consequences. To begin understanding the clash between religion and human life, consider the Dark Ages, the interminable centuries following the fall of Rome in the 5th century AD. The barbarian tribes that overran Rome eventually converted to Christianity. In fact, some of them were Christians, in the act of sacking Rome. But anyway, the pagan tribes quickly converted to Christianity, which in the form of the Catholic Church became the dominant philosophic and cultural force of medieval Europe. Unlike the essentially secular classical world or the post-Renaissance modern world, the medieval world embraced religion fully. The medieval world embraced religion as its fundamental source of truth and moral guidance. What were the results of human life? The church held what amounted to a theocratic dictatorship. It prescribed doctrine and it proscribed free thinking. For centuries it burned heretics at the stake. The dispute regarding the Trinity is a representative example. The church held that Jesus is God, but distinct from God the Father, nevertheless God is one. You go, what? Run that by me again. Jesus is God, but distinct from God the Father, nevertheless God is one. Now, this oh yeah, it's blind me, that's good. Now, Arius, who was a 4th century Catholic clergyman, recognized that logically, this is nonsense. He and his supporters, in an attempt to clarify and uphold monotheism, held that God created Jesus, so that Jesus is therefore divine, but is not identical to God the Father. After protracted theologic wrangling, the church leaders upheld the Trinity, declared Arius and his followers to be heretics, and theologic war ensued in which thousands of people, Orthodox Catholics on the one hand and then the Arian Christians on the other, thousands were killed, thousands of Christians killed on each side by their fellow Christians. Now, the church's repression of the so-called Manichaean heresy was even worse. Church officials held that God is both all-powerful and all-good. How then can there be evil and destructiveness in his world? Presumably, if God is all-good, he desires to save his children from catastrophes. If God's all-powerful, he's able to do so. Why then the epidemics, volcanoes, and earthquakes, as well as volitionally chosen human evil, plague God's children? From these premises, the Manichaeans gave a plausible answer. To them, God is all good, but he's not all powerful. He fights evil relentlessly and effectively, but evil has some power in the world. God is like a divine form of Batman. He's fighting evil, like I said, constantly and effectively, but evil is like Gotham City. Evil has some power. For centuries, the church warred against various iterations of Manichaeanism, killing thousands, burning books, and demanding blind acceptance. Further, the church suppressed during the Dark Ages, the early Middle Ages, the era's leading philosophers. For example, the church so effectively burned one of the books by John Scotus Erigena, recognized today as the only original philosopher for 500 years. They burned one of his books so effectively that today not a single copy survived. Peter Abelard, probably the greatest European in line between Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas infuriated the church by his belief that all Christian teachings were explainable in terms of Aristotelian logic, and the Pope imposed a decree of perpetual silence on this genius, and they burned some of his writings. Church officials threatened Jean Roslin, one of Abelard's teachers, with excommunication if he did not recant one of his theories. He recanted. This brief survey of repression by the medieval church is not funny. This could be endlessly extended. The economic results followed accordingly. Economist Angus Madison, one of the leading economic historians of the 20th century, reports that Europe showed zero economic growth in per capita income for the 1,000 years between 500 AD and 1500 AD. Crushing poverty, the inability to rise for a full millennium, to rise out of the ashes of Rome's destruction, was an ongoing tragedy of the era of religious domination, as was the human life expectancy, which failed to rise out of the 20s. Dogma, superstition, and the pyre stifled the free-thinking human mind, halting philosophic, scientific, medical, and technological progress. The great advances brought about by the leading thinkers of the classical era in literature, philosophy, medicine, science, mathematics were largely lost in the Western world. Reason, not to be liberated until the Renaissance, was a choked and leashed poodle forced to follow its master of blind faith. What was the deepest cause of a cultural decline into the abyss that lasted for almost 1,000 years? Why did this quest for heaven lead to hell on earth? The cause was religion. The reason it led to hell on earth is that religion clashes with every rational requirement of human life. The first step in understanding this is to identify here's the structure of the talk. The first step is to identify the philosophic essence of religion. The second step is to identify the fundamental requirements of human life. And then the third step is to show that point for point these two clash. There's no reconciliation there. So let's start here. The philosophic principles of religion. Religion, notice, is an attempt to answer the fundamental philosophic questions. What is the nature of the universe or reality? It's metaphysics. What is the nature of human beings? It's the metaphysical nature of man. How? By what means do human beings gain knowledge? Epistemology. What is the good? Ethics. What is the good society? Politics. Those are the 5 questions of philosophy. What's the nature of the universe? What's the nature of man? How do we know? What is the good? What is the good society? In metaphysics, the branch of philosophy that studies the nature of the universe taken as a whole, religion asserts the existence of an all-powerful spirit, the super ghost of the universe, as I think of it, this all-powerful spirit that created and governs the universe. Created it from nothing, by the way. Reality is dualistic, sundered into 2 dimensions, the natural and the supernatural. The supernatural world, the realm of God, is superior to the natural world in every form. It is the cause of the natural world, and therefore, thereby the source of laws in both physics and morality. Religion's theory of human nature follows directly from its metaphysics, from its view of reality. Human beings are metaphysically bifurcated. We have a soul that emanates from a higher world and a body that belongs to this one. Because God is morally superior. Can you mind leaving that open? It's going to get hot in here. Well, yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that. Because God is morally superior to human beings, our soul, the godlike element in our makeup, is morally superior to the body or flesh, which is susceptible to sinful and carnal bodily temptations. The soul and the body on this religious view, the soul and the body exist in this untenable mix, an inherent moral conflict. The body seeking gratification and indulgence of its desires, and the soul seeking to restrain us to achieve moral guidance and to make sure that we don't indulge these sinful temptations of the flesh. What was Jesus' famous line on this? Quote, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak," unquote. And when Jesus says the spirit is willing to obey God, right? The spirit's willing to embrace God. When Jesus says the flesh is weak, he doesn't mean psychologically weak. On the contrary, those fleshly desires are powerful. He means morally weak, that we don't have the flesh or the body doesn't have the strength to resist those urges. Now, epistemology is the branch of knowledge that examines the means and method, but see, God likes this talk. Sending us fresh air. Thank you, bro. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that examines the means and method by which human beings gain knowledge. Now, the fundamental question of epistemology is, how do we gain and verify truth? How do we gain knowledge? Now, here, of course, religion emphasizes faith. In contrast to reason, the method of science and secular philosophy, science and secular philosophy, to start with direct observation of nature, of the world out here, and then seek to explain the observed facts of nature with theories that are, with logical, non-contradictory theories based in observed fact. In contrast to that, faith doesn't begin with the method of faith doesn't begin with observation of nature. Rather, it begins with a book. It begins with a text. Whether it's the Old Testament for the Jews, both Testaments for the Christians, the Quran for the Muslims, etc. And the text, the holy text, is held to have been written by human beings, divinely inspired, and therefore is infallible. So anything that it tells us is literally true. Now, and by us, whatever the holy text says we must uncritically accept its teachings. The most important knowledge or truth, according to religion, are faith-based beliefs gleaned from the revealed text. Truths insusceptible to observation or to logical criticism based on observation. Again, to quote from Jesus in the Gospel, quote, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible to you," unquote. So if the Holy Book states that the universe was created from nothing, or that virgins give birth, or that a sheer act of belief can move a mountain or the like, the claim is to be accepted regardless of its logical impossibility. Faith is belief in that for which there is no evidence, and very often in contradiction to a great deal of evidence. As Mark Twain once put it, faith is when you believe something you know ain't so. Now, ethics or morality is the branch of philosophy concerned with the issues of right and wrong. Religion commands unquestioning obedience to the Creator. Because God is the creator of the world and of human beings, His creation is His, and He governs it. This is why the first commandment of the Bible states what it does: "I am the Lord thy God; thou shalt have no other gods before me." That's not merely the first commandment in the Old Testament. In a certain way, that's the only commandment. Because what that says is God comes first. God must come first, and I must accept and act on anything He tells me. Notice that the God lays down the 10 Commandments. He hasn't presented His children with the 10 suggestions, or the 10 recommendations, or the 10 pieces of advice. These are the 10 Commandments because God lays down the law, and ours is not to question, but simply to obey. Now, notice then, for an all-powerful creator, the good is anything that he says it is. And the good is what he says is good, and because he says it. And evil is what he says is evil, and because he says so. So fundamental virtue is obedience. Anything God stipulates, anything God requires of us, the fundamental virtue is obedience. This is why, of course, the fundamental sin, in Eden, the fundamental sin, in the original sin or the original vice, was this form of eating from the tree of knowledge, but it would have been the original sin. The original sin in its form is disobedience. So, how do we know that any of the Bible's commandments are morally right? Well, by means of faith, which is the epistemological method of religion. Now, what does all this imply in the realm of politics? Historically, notice something. Historically, wherever religion has been philosophically and culturally dominant, politically, that society was a theocracy, was a state governed by the clergy. And whether it was Europe under the medieval church, or whether it was the Puritans in Geneva under Calvin in the 16th century, or in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the 17th, or the Ayatollahs in Iran, or any number of other examples, the philosophic cause of this is clear. To religionists of any religion, for man's law to be virtuous, it must be in adherence to God's law. Who best knows God's law? Well, the clergy or theologians who devote their lives to studying it. Therefore, strict adherence to religion requires that a spiritual elite govern the state to make sure that man's law is in accordance with God's law. Now, one 20th century philosopher put it this way, quote, "As soon as absolute truth is contained in the sayings of a certain individual, whether Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, or any other, there is a body of experts to interpret his sayings. And these experts infallibly acquire power since they hold the key to truth. It is their business to expound an unchanging truth, revealed once and all in utter perfection. So they become necessarily opponents of all intellectual and moral progress." Unquote. Anybody recognize that quote, who that's from? That's Bertrand Russell. Why I am not a Christian. Now, in summary, religion's answers to life's fundamental questions are as follows. What is the nature of the universe? It is created and governed by God and consists of two dimensions, the natural and the supernatural, the latter creating and governing the former. What is the nature of human beings? What is the nature of man? He's a dualistic being of two parts. Part spirit, part flesh. Part good, part godly, part sinful. Part good, part evil. A being torn by incessant soul-body conflict. Again, what is quote Dostoevsky from the brothers Karamazov? God and the devil struggle, and their battleground is the human soul. And our dualistic nature is a struggle between good and evil, or as in Paul's version of that, the Apostle Paul, of course, it's a struggle between the soul and the flesh. How do human beings gain knowledge? They do so by means of faith in the truth of God's word as presented in the holy text. What is the good? It is obedience to God's word. What are the principles of a good society? They are the principles espoused by the expert interpreters of God's commandments. Religion is a subcategory of philosophy, which is its genus. It is faith. It is a faith-based, obedience-oriented philosophic system. Now, this analysis leads us to a rough working definition of religion. Religion is a philosophic system based in faith, upholding the existence of an all-powerful God who requires blind obedience from the sinful subjects he created and governs. I like that definition. It's mine. So I'll give it to you again for the same price. Religion is a philosophic system based in faith, upholding the existence of an all-powerful God who requires blind obedience from the sinful subjects he created and governs. This is the essence of religion. But what are the requirements of human life on earth? So let's turn to the second section of the talk. Prior to the Industrial Revolution of late 18th century Great Britain, famine in Europe and around the world was pervasive. Untreatable disease, such as the catastrophic Black Death in the 14th century, was widespread. Utter destitution was rampant. Life expectancy, even in England, in the 18th century, did not reach 35. Now, the scientific, technological, and industrial revolutions definitively changed all that. Advances in theoretical science, applied science, and consequent industrialization and the mass production of consumer goods made possible extraordinary improvements in living standards and life expectancy. For example, an infant girl born in the West today has a life expectancy of roughly 80 years. It's more than double, what the life expectancy was just several hundred years ago. And of course, at standards of living undreamed of by her ancestors just several centuries previously. Now, also during the 18th century, intellectual and political revolutionaries in Great Britain's North American colonies established the freest nation in history. Such giants as Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and others founded the American Republic on the principle of an individual's inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This principle enabled citizens of the new republic to act fully in accordance with their basic means of survival, their reasoning minds. Over the past 220 years, more than 220 years now, but the principle of individual rights established by the American Revolution has liberated the brain power of hundreds of millions of individuals, including millions and millions of immigrants, which is going to be a dwindling number now as Trump makes America great again, right? Let's build a wall across the Mexican border, boys. The irony of all that, if Trump is going to actually build that wall, he's going to need to hire illegal Mexican immigrants to build it. How's that for an irony? But it has given rise, the freedom of the American Republic gave rise to extraordinary advances in every field of intellectual endeavor, including such pioneering achievements as Thomas Edison's electric light, the Wright brothers' airplane, Henry Ford's mass production of automobiles, William James trailblazing the field of cognitive psychology, the literary works of Hawthorne, Poe, Melville, Twain, a little bit later on, Ayn Rand, and who I will argue that Ayn Rand is the greatest novelist in the history of world literature. A judgment I will stand by until the day I die, and that The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged are the two greatest novels ever written. And what would have happened to her in the Soviet Union? The way she came, let's not think about it. The birth of a mass publishing industry, the birth of the film industry, the birth of the music industry, and of course the computer internet revolutions, and we can go on and on. Fundamentally, there are three principles that mankind must recognize and embrace if human beings are to flourish on Earth. The first is that the reasoning mind, is mankind's basic means of survival. The second is that the requirements of human life constitute the... Yes, Abigail, I agree. The requirements of human life constitute the proper standard of morality, the criterion by which good and evil are judged. And the third principle is that each individual should strive to attain his or her own life-serving values and personal happiness. So let's take these three in turn. Reason is mankind's basic means of survival. Reason is man's sole means of understanding reality and his basic means of living on earth. Notice that every species nature endows every species with some characteristics by means of which they compete for survival. Right? Birds have their wings with which to fly. Lions have claws and fangs to tear apart and devour their prey. Antelopes have foot speed to outrun the lions, and so forth. Now, whereas these other species survive by purely physicalistic means, claws and fangs, wings to fly, foot speed, etc., human beings do not. I mean, if we tried to compete for survival with these other animals on physical grounds, our lives would be sadly abridged. Let's see by a show of hands, how many people here would want to try to outrun a starving lion? No, not such a good idea. It's not great foot speed or claws and fangs or size or strength or anything like that enable human beings to survive and to prosper on Earth, but reason, our intelligence. Ayn Rand points out in Atlas Shrugged, doesn't just point out, she dramatizes brilliantly, that every value human life depends on is a product of the reasoning mind. Food, for example, maybe the most fundamental. Needs to be grown, which requires knowledge of agricultural science and knowledge of agricultural technology, which requires the reasoning mind. Medicines and treatments to treat or cure diseases have to be researched and developed, which requires knowledge of biology and the reasoning mind. These buildings that we live in, need to be constructed by human beings, which fundamentally requires knowledge of architecture, mathematics, engineering, again, which requires the reasoning mind. I could give 1,000 other examples, but the part of the theme of Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, of course, is that reason is mankind's fundamental means of survival. So what follows from that is any rejection of reason for any alternative is a rejection of mankind's survival instrument, and thus a rejection of man's life. Let me repeat that, because this I think is the most critical blow against religion. Any rejection of reason for any alternative is a rejection of mankind's survival instrument, and therefore is a rejection of man's life on earth. That reason is the basic means by which human beings promote their lives is clear. But the question remains, why is the enhancement of human life good? Or more generally, what makes anything good? Whether education, wealth, love, family, or anything else. Man's life is the standard of value. The question of what makes something good or bad has puzzled philosophers for millennia. For example, if it was said that an individual should work hard and productively and honestly support himself or herself, most people would probably agree. But why? Why is that good? Is it because God commands it? Or because society deems it so? Or because an individual judges that this is right for himself or herself? Or alternatively, is there some fundamental fact of reality that requires it of human beings, that requires productivity of us, that mandates it, productivity, as a necessity of human life? Now, Ayn Rand answered this question. She identified in the 20th century, after 2,500 years of Western philosophy, a rational, fact-based theory of morality. Prior to Rand, philosophers had generally repudiated the idea that moral values could be based on or derived from facts. David Hume, the Scottish philosopher, of course, is very famous. for this. He asked the question of whether an ought proposition, that's something, some claim that we ought to do this, or we should do that. Can an ought proposition be derived from an is proposition? In other words, can a moral judgment or a moral principle be logically based in facts of observation? Hume answered that question, no, they cannot be. Hume held in effect, in other words, that moral judgments are subjective. They simply express the preference of any person who expresses them. They have no logical connection to the objective world, to facts. Hume held, in effect, to stay with my example, that while he could observe the observable facts here, that while he could observe an individual working long hours, earning money, paying bills, devising a budget, putting money in the bank to save, and so forth, he could not discern the good in this. Where is the good, he asked. One cannot directly observe the good. We can't touch it. We can't see it. We can't taste it. Where's the good? If there's no observational evidence, no facts to establish that some action is good, then the claims of the good or judgments of right and wrong are not based in fact. And Hume concluded that no identifiable positive relationship exists between values and facts, between our judgments of right and wrong and the facts of nature. Value judgments, Hume says, are not based in the facts of reality, but rather in some other consideration. Now, the idea that values, or judgments of right and wrong, cannot be grounded in observable fact, but must be based in something else, has been prevalent in various forms in philosophy for millennia, and still is. Fundamentally, I think there are three schools of thought on this issue: the religious school, the social school, and the personal school. The religious school holds that God's will is the standard of right and wrong. On this view, anything God commands is good by virtue of his will alone. So, for example, if he chooses to flood the earth, killing untold numbers of human beings, that's good, because he makes it so. He willed it. Or if he chooses to slay thousands of Hebrews for the crime of worshiping a golden calf, then that's good, because God wills it. Or if God chooses to permit Satan on a bet to torment the virtuous Job, then these actions are good simply because God wills them. This was the dominant moral theory, of course, of medieval Europe, and is the dominant moral theory today throughout most of the Arab Islamic world. The social school maintains that society's collective judgment is the standard of right and wrong. On this view, good and evil don't come from on high, but rather they're created by society. They're created by the group. And consequently, judgments of good and evil are relative from one society to another. So, human slavery may be good in North Korea, or may be right for for North Korea, but it's wrong in the West. If a given society, let's say Iran, judges that God is the source of moral law, then for that society, God is going to be is properly considered the source of moral law. If in places in Europe, society is considered the source of moral law, not God, then in those societies, the state will be considered the source of moral law. Now, notice that National Socialism, Nazism, and communism, are the ne plus ultra, right? The logical conclusion, the perfected conclusion of the social school. The state is all powerful. The state or society as a whole creates right and wrong. It's like the state is a little mini God on earth, right? And whatever the state decrees, the state decrees is right. Now, for those of you familiar with the history of philosophy, the main the main progenitor of this theory that the state is the source of right and wrong is the enormously influential German philosopher Hegel, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Now, it has its antecedents, of course, in Plato. Many of you probably read Plato's Republic. It has its roots in Plato, but Hegel, a 19th century German Kantian, Kant lays the moral foundations in the modern world, and Hegel builds the political superstructure. Marx, the communists, and the Nazis put that theory into practice. But the state is all powerful. The state is a little mini God on earth. Whatever the state wills is good because it wills it. So, if the state wills relentless race war, and you conquer, enslave, and or murder, the inferior races, if that's what the state wills, then that's right. Or parallel to that, if the state wills a just as relentless class war, and you murder tens of millions of bourgeoisies, the Soviet Union and the states that spun off from the Soviet Union, then that's right. In Cambodia, if you're gonna murder the educated, the urban dwellers, the people who speak English or wear glasses, because the intellectuals, then that's right because the state deems it so, and so on. So because society, on the modern collectivist mentality, because society is held akin to a mini God on earth, we could see that this code is a secularization of the religious code. The state is all powerful, creator of right and wrong on earth. Now, the personal school holds that an individual's sheer will is the standard of right and wrong. Whatever the individual wants to do is good for him or her, simply because he wants to do it. I'm old enough. I may be the only person in this room old enough to remember the hippie movement of the. No, maybe not. Yeah, all right. But maybe a few of us maybe remember. But one thing we could say about the hippies is, their music was good, but their famous moral aphorism was, if it feels good, do it. Right? Whatever drugs you want to, indulge, or whatever indiscriminate sex you want to, indulge in. If it feels good, do it. Whatever you will is right for yourself is right for yourself. It may not be right for anybody else, but it's right for you. So in this view, an individual's feelings, tell him or her the proper actions to perform or shun. If he wants to use toxic drugs or engage in indiscriminate sex, or to work productively, or to sponge off of other people, or to assault them, or whatever, then doing so is good for that individual. Now, in the modern Western world, this personal subjectivism, this idea that right or wrong depends on what an individual feels for himself or herself. This is the secondary. This code is the code in the modern Western world. This is the code of that's second in importance, right? The social school is the most dominant in the modern Western world. Religion is still dominant in the Arab Islamic world. The social school is dominant in the modern Western world, and the personal school, I think, is of secondary. Is second in the modern Western world, is second in influence. Now, in fact, notice that the personal school is a variation on the social school, because for both, right and wrong are decided subjectively by whim, whether the individual's desires or the collectives, or the groups. History of philosophy. Who's the main progenitor or spokesman for this school of thought? Well, it goes back to classical Greece. The Sophists, were the main developers of the personal school. If you read Plato's Republic, Thrasymachus, and those early books of the Republic, Plato gives him a lot of airtime. He's arguing with Socrates, not because Plato agrees with him, but because Plato disagrees with him. Right? That Thrasymachus' claim is, what's the question in the Republic? what is justice, right? Thrasymachus' answer, justice is the will of the stronger. Human beings have their desires. If we desire the same thing, we fight. There's no moral rules to this game. The stronger wins, the weaker loses. And that's all there is to it. Right and wrong are determined by individual or personal desire. In the modern world, depending on what mood he was in, Friedrich Nietzsche, at times puts forth this theory. Notice, by the way, Ayn Rand's, all of you Ayn Rand fans, her early flirtation with Nietzsche, with Nietzsche's philosophy, you could see her rejection of it in The Fountainhead, because Gail Wynand has that will to power, that Nietzsche speaks of, that you do anything it takes to gain power, and you see Ayn Rand, who by then was an Aristotelian in philosophy, showing in action that Nietzschean will to power is self-destructive, and it leads, of course, to the demise of Wynand, the great tragic hero of The Fountainhead. So, historically, the choices offered to mankind have been follow God's will, or follow society's dictates, or follow your own personal desires. It remained for Ayn Rand in Atlas Shrugged, and in her non-fiction book, The Virtue of Selfishness, to demonstrate that objective facts, not subjective will or whims, whether divine, social, or personal, form the basis of moral judgments. Rand provided a revolutionary approach to the ought is question. If you know the history of moral philosophy, you really appreciate Ayn Rand's innovativeness here, because she rejected the premise that values are grounded in mere desires of the subject, whether the subject is divine, this consciousness or mind or soul is divine, social, or personal. And she asked the question, the innovative question, what is the fundamental fact of reality that gives rise to the entire phenomenon of value? Sometimes what it takes is just tweak the question, because it may take a genius to do it. But notice how Ayn Rand recalibrates the question. The question as traditionally asked was, what is the relationship between values and facts? And Rand just kind of turns the question. She says, what is the fundamental fact of reality that gives rise to the entire phenomenon of value? And once she turns the question like that, it points us directly to the answer. It is only because living beings must attain certain ends in order to sustain their lives that the phenomenon of valuing arises. In other words, Rand's saying, if the whole universe were like the dark side of the moon, let's say, and it was just inanimate matter and a bunch of lunar rocks, and there was no living beings, there would be no valuing in the universe. There would be no judgments of right and wrong. There'd be no right and wrong. But living beings exist and must achieve certain ends in order to sustain their lives. And what a living being requires in order to live, that's the good for it. And what?
5 minutes. If you could.
Oh, no, we're not going to finish in 5 minutes.
Okay, try. Yeah, that's fine. I'll be flexible.
Thank you. And that which harms or destroys, the life of an animate being is the evil. I'll pick up the pace. So, observe the causal connection between an organism's life and its values. A plant, must gain the water and sunlight it requires, otherwise it'll die. So those things are its values. That's what's good for it. An animal must find food, etc., in order to sustain its life. That's the good for it. Human beings, again, the alternative is stark. We have to grow food, for example, build houses, etc., cure diseases, without, in the absence of which we'll die. These are legitimate values for human beings. These are the good. This insight that the factual, objective necessities of life are the source and origin of value. This is the indispensable identification that serves as the foundation of an objective or rational ethics. If a being's life is the source and goal of valuing, then man's life, the life proper to a rational being, must be the standard of moral value. As Rand says, that which is proper to the life of a rational being is the good, and that which negates, opposes, or destroys it is the evil. If the concepts of good and evil arise only because certain courses of action promote human life and others harm or destroy it, then the good is that which benefits human life, and the evil is that which is inimical to it. The quote from Ayn Rand, the validation of value judgments is to be achieved by reference to the facts of reality. The fact that a living being is determines what it ought to do, unquote. To put it simply, the requirements of human life are the standard of right and wrong. Factual requirements of human life. Now, notice the third point of a rational ethics. The individual is the proper beneficiary of his own actions. This is the third moral principle. If values come into existence only because certain things are necessary to sustain life, then who or what should achieve them? Who should be the beneficiary of values? Both historically and logically, there are only two alternatives. An individual can achieve values for himself or herself, or he can sacrifice himself and provide selfless service to God or society, or both. The code of self-interest, of course known as egoism, the code of self-sacrifice, called altruism, and historically altruism has been the dominant code, whether human beings are called upon to sacrifice themselves for God or the state. Rand's validation of egoism is clear based on her fundamentals. If values must be gained in order to support life, then the question follows, who or what is alive? Who must act to gain and or keep values? Whose life is at stake? Only individual organisms are alive. Societies or groups are not alive. Only the individuals that compose them. Fundamentally, only individuals can pursue or gain values. And only because they need values to sustain their life. Now, this is true of all values, including an individual's most basic biologic functions. Howard Roark, in the Hero of the Fountainhead, makes this point nicely. Quote, "We can divide a meal amongst many men. We cannot digest it in a collective stomach. No man can use his lungs to breathe for another. No man can use his brain to think for another. All the functions of body and spirit are private." Now, notice, just as there is no collective stomach to digest food, so there is no collective organism to achieve values. Only individuals are alive. Only individuals need to gain values in order to sustain their lives. Only individuals will perish if they do not obtain the values their lives require. All human cooperative effort is between and amongst individuals. So an individual's need to achieve values is based logically in the factual requirements of human life. The objective phenomenon that makes both possible and necessary the entire field of morality. The validation of egoism involves, or self-interest, involves this identification. Life requires the achievement of values, not their surrender or sacrifice. If you understand that, that's the whole argument for egoism. Life requires the achievement of values, not their surrender or sacrifice. In order to live, we need to achieve values. In principle, by surrendering or sacrificing values, we can't live that way. We can only die that way. So, to pursue values is to seek life. To relinquish or sacrifice them is to court death. Life requires egoism. Death is the result of altruism. And since human life is the standard of moral value, that which supports it is the good. Egoism supports life, it's the good. Altruism negates life, it's the evil. Altruism calls for the sacrifice of one's values. It should not be confused with kindness toward others. Goodwill toward people that you care about or at least have no reason to think are bad people, is properly an important value for a rational human being. For example, we can receive great joy and fulfillment from helping your child, your spouse, your closest friends, even from helping a stranger. Conversely, where is the goodwill towards an individual who's called upon to sacrifice his values? Whether his education, his career, his wealth, his love, his life, there is no goodwill in demanding or even requesting somebody to sacrifice himself. Genuine caring for others resides in encouraging them to spread their wings and fly, exhorting them to achieve their values and prosper, urging them to live rationally, productively, egoistically. Genuine goodwill or benevolence or kindness lies in identifying another person's values and supporting their quest to achieve values, never in calling upon them to sacrifice. Now, millions of loving parents, as we have people here planted in the audience, millions of loving parents understand this, at least implicitly, and rear their children with such a common sense form of egoism. Put simply, non-sacrificially helping others, helping those who are good people and about whom one genuinely cares, is good. Sacrificing the self, doing things that in any way harm one's life, is evil. Now, we're almost done. Ayn Rand asked and answered the fundamental question of moral philosophy. What are values? Values are those ends or goals that, given an organism's nature, objectively promote its life. Based on this revolutionary insight, she proceeded to ask and answer 3 further questions of moral philosophy. 1, what is the standard of moral values? She answers the factual requirements of human life. 2, by what means are human beings to attain those values? Her answer, of course, is fundamentally by means of the rational mind. 3, who or what should primarily benefit from those values? And her answer is the individual acting in pursuit of them. These 3 principles, life as the standard of moral value, reason as man's basic means of living, and the individual as the proper beneficiary of his own actions, constitute the ethical code of life. These are the 3 principles that human beings must embrace and uphold if we're to prosper on earth. Now, where does religion stand on these life-giving principles? Tragically for mankind, it inexorably opposes every one of them. The last section of the talk. The irreconcilability of human life and religion. Religion subordinates reason to faith. This is the primary reason of its destructive power and its evil. It morally requires and often physically coerces human beings to accept the precepts of a revealed text. Whether it's the Pope silencing Abelard, or the Inquisition suppressing Galileo, or the fundamentalists banning Darwin, or the jihadists murdering anyone who criticizes Islam, or one of 1,000 other horrors, religion forbids human beings from asking and rationally answering the fundamental questions of human life. It squashes the free-thinking mind. It calls for the burning of books. It severely retards education, and it throttles progress in philosophy, the arts, science, medicine, technology, and any other discipline you care to mention. For example, in just one of those vital fields, education, observe that throughout most of the Middle Ages, a period spanning virtually a millennium, the overwhelming majority of the Western European population was fully illiterate. Under the aegis of the Catholic Church, was fully illiterate. In some contemporary Islamic countries, girls are not taught to read. The Taliban will put a bullet in a woman's head or throw acid in a girl's face for the crime of seeking an education. Reason, said Martin Luther in an immortal line, is the devil's whore. You gotta love that. Right? Reason is the devil's harlot, Luther said. Religion holds God's will, not the requirements of man's earthly life, as the standard of moral value. Whatever God wills, whether beneficial or inimical to human life, is the good. If he forbids eating the fruit of the tree of moral knowledge, thereby condemning human beings to ethical ignorance, then that is good. If he says human beings are to be judged for their thoughts and desires, not just their actions, then judging men accordingly is a moral imperative. Thus emerges the grim spectacle of a man condemned solely for desiring to sleep with a married woman, even though, as a matter of moral principle, he steadfastly refuses to act on it. Further, if God slays thousands of human beings for worshiping a golden calf instead of him, in violation of a commandment not yet received, then this is good simply because he wills it. God's will be done, or alternatively, Allahu Akbar. God is great. It has often been observed how much murderous brutality is perpetrated in the name of God. This is the fundamental reason. If God's will is primary, then everything else, including human life, is secondary. If Old Testament Jews or Christian crusaders or Islamic jihadists believe that God speaks to them and tells them to murder the infidels, then the believers will regard aggressive slaughter of human life as morally upright. The fundamental principle is, when man's life is subordinated to any consideration, God's will or another, then human beings will be sacrificed to that ruling consideration, and human beings are going to die in hordes. Now, egoism, the moral code exhorting an individual's rational quest for values, is anathema to religion, because on a God-based ethics, virtue is achieved by means of selfless service to the deity. For example, God required Abraham's willingness to kill his beloved child in obedience to God. In addition to demanding self-sacrificial actions, religion condemns countless actions that are rationally self-interested, such as charging interest on loaned money, drinking alcohol even in moderation, making love out of wedlock, and so forth. All major religions regard sexual love, in particular, perhaps the greatest joy of human life, as carnal, base, ignoble. To discourage it, Islam requires women to be covered from head to toe, permitting only their eyes to appear, and maybe not even that. Orthodox Judaism stipulates for women extreme modesty of dress, enforced by berating those considered immodest. Orthodox Judaism bans a woman during menstruation from all sexual contact with her husband and requires ritual purification before contact resumes. The Puritans prohibited dancing. Medieval Catholics invented the chastity belt, the only invention that ever came out of religion. Religions in general regard males as hopeless, lust-dominated beasts, hold that females must be the guardians of virginity, and condemn women as promiscuous sluts if they are not. It is impossible to calculate how many women have been riddled with guilt because they enjoyed lovemaking and have been robbed of a healthy sexuality because they had drummed into their heads since childhood that nice girls don't like sex. Religion enjoins human beings to renounce sexual pleasure and countless other values in sacrificial obedience to an alleged God. Now, not all religions call for all of the above, but religion insists on the existence of a supernatural realm, on its moral superiority to the natural one, on the subordination of reason to faith, and on blind acceptance, blind obedience to an illusory being. Given such a primitive, indeed psychopathological philosophy, any atrocity is justifiable. Religion's atrocious history is grim testament to this truth. Now, religion opposes every moral principle required by human life on earth. It upholds faith over reason, God's will as the standard of moral value over the factual requirements of human life, and the sacrifice of one's values over the pursuit of them. Because of the fundamentals of religion's approach to moral philosophy, wherever and whenever it is adopted, it necessarily leads to hell on earth. Now, many good people pay lip service to religion, but are in fact of mixed spirituality. By analogy, the United States has a mixed political system, a combination of individualism and collectivism, of capitalism and socialism, of freedom and statism. The freer capitalist elements lead to achievements and prosperity. The controlled statist elements lead to suppression and stagnation. Similarly, many so-called religious people have a mixed intellectual or spiritual system, a combination of reason, self-interested policies, and of course, religious self-sacrificial ones. Such in, the people of mixed spirituality who have a large element of reason, notice they'll go to medical doctors, not to faith healers. They read a variety of books, not merely the Bible. They drink alcohol in moderation, enjoy sex with partners they love, even out of wedlock, recognize the truth of evolution, and so on. Many so-called religious people have an extremely attenuated commitment to religion. They view religion essentially as love God and be kind to your fellow man. That's it. That's a very diluted view of religion. They don't reject reason in most of their life for faith. They do not hold that this life is but a testing ground for a better one to come. They do not despise human beings as a sinful being. They don't uphold an ethics of self-sacrifice, don't condemn pursuit of this worldly values and personal happiness, do not believe that infidels should be murdered. In fact, don't even have the word infidel as part of their vocabulary. Now, in people of mixed spirituality, the rational secular values lead to success and happiness, the faith-based religious ones to failure and misery. On this point, observe the vivid difference in outcome between the predominantly rational so-called religious parent who takes his diabetic child to an MD and the predominantly religious parent who takes the sick child to a faith healer. It is long past time for the United States and the Western world to repudiate the irrational part of the mixture and to fully embrace the rational part. If we do this, we'll find that our own lives, as well as the conditions of our countries, will improve dramatically. Thank you. Thank you. Now, before going to Q&A, we're gonna, huh?
There's a little bit of happening.